Hello everyone. In the previous chapters, we discussed about the several changes in economic and political life between circa 600 BCE and 600 CE. In this particular chapter, we'll emphasize on the early societies and we'll talk about kinship, caste and class between circa 600 BCE and 600 CE. The topics that we'll cover today are textual sources to understand social behavior and the critical edition of Mahabharata. After the end of this video lesson, you would be able to tell the meaning of kinship, class and caste, explain the significance of textual sources to understand social behavior, and tell about the critical edition of Mahabharata. Also, you would be able to discuss the stages of the project on the critical edition of Mahabharata. It's very important to understand these three important keywords: kinship, caste and class. So very simply, if we talk about kinship, it is the socially recognized relationship between people in a culture who are either held to be biologically related or given the status of relatives by marriage, adoption or other rituals. So all in your broad family would be considered as kin relations. So that could be socially organized as blood relations that we can call as biologically, and also the relationship that gets established because of marriage. Caste is a very common word in our society, in Indian society. It is a division of society based on differences of wealth, inherited rank or privilege, profession, occupation or race. Most importantly, the division happened based on the occupation that a particular community performed, as well as the division today is on the basis of wealth or inherited rank or privilege. Another terminology is class, and it's a common word that we say a particular class, high class or low class. So a system of ordering society whereby people are divided into sets based on perceived social or economic status. So that clearly or majorly depends on the social and economic status. Now, let's discuss about the textual sources to understand social behavior. The textual traditions and Mahabharata. We'll understand with these two, both are textual sources. And when we say textual sources, the sources which are in the text format, in the written format or manuscripts. So those manuscripts or texts tells about the textual traditions. The traditions actually, and we can say that as textual traditions. So with the help of the text, with the help of the writings, we could understand the different traditions prevalent in the society. And it would tell us the social history, the social behavior, and the situations and practices. What was the history of a particular social class or caste or a kinship model? And it would also tell about the social behavior, how different communities behave, and the different practices and the situations of different families or the social classes. And in this regard, we have Mahabharata as a textual source which tells us about attitudes and practices, the attitudes of Kshatriyas, the attitudes of the warriors, and the people. And we are all aware that it is a colossal epic. Colossal epic, very big epic. And when we say epic, it's a very long poetry in verses. And you can see here, it includes 100,000 verses. And it is considered as the richest text in which we get a lot of information. And it is all about warring cousins. The cousin brothers or the cousins fought with each other. That has been shown in Mahabharata, as you are already aware about it. Now let's know about V.S. Suktankar. Vishnu Sitaram Suktankar, also known as V.S. Suktankar, was an eminent Indologist and scholar of Sanskrit. It is an eminent name who gave the critical edition of Mahabharata. And he was a scholar of Sanskrit. And when we talk about Indologist, means Indian studies, about India, about the history of India and the cultures of India. He is principally known as the general editor of the critical edition of the Mahabharata, published by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune, India. And he in fact led the team who wrote the critical edition of the Mahabharata, who compiled the critical edition of Mahabharata. I'll discuss further in the next slide. And this edition is also known as Pune edition. Pune was previously known as Pune. Now, let's understand the critical edition of Mahabharata, what exactly it was. It was one of the most ambitious projects of scholarship. Began in 1919 under the leadership of V.S. Suktankar. And this task began in 1919 under the leadership of V.S. Suktankar. A team comprising dozens of scholars initiated the task. And in this project, manuscripts, the handwritten texts written in Sanskrit in a variety of different scripts, were collected from different parts of the country. And the team worked out a method of comparing verses from each manuscripts. Like the different manuscripts were taken together and they were properly analyzed, studied, analyzed, and the different verses or the shlokas were compared with each other. Common verses to most versions published in several volumes. So, in fact, it was a tough task to compare all the verses and to keep all the verses together, and those those which varied from each other were kept separate, and the verses which were found common were published in several volumes. You can see the picture here, and in this picture at the top you see the section printed in large bold at the top that you see is part of the main text, and the smaller print lists variation in different manuscripts which were carefully catalogued, means put together. This project took 47 years to complete. The several volumes has 13,000 pages, so you can clearly imagine how robust the project was, and it took 47 years, 13,000 pages. This edition is also known as Pune edition, as I have already mentioned and we discussed earlier. There were enormous regional variations. More than half the 13,000 pages are devoted to these variations. So 50% of the 13,000 pages are dedicated to variation in the text, and these variations were documented in footnotes and appendices to the main text. Now let's talk about the variations reflective of complex processes. The complex processes involved. The dialogues are characterized by the moments of conflict as well as consensus. So there were conflicts based on the different script text, and consensus was also established. Our understanding of these processes is derived primarily from texts written in Sanskrit by and for Brahmanas. So the texts specifically were written by Brahmanas and of course for Brahmanas. And when issues of social history were explored for the first time, when it was explored by historians in the 19th and 20th centuries, they tended to take these texts at face value. It's very important to understand this term face value. It means considering whatever practices mentioned or laid down in these texts were considered as definitely that had been practiced. And subsequently, scholars began studying other traditions from works in Pali, Prakrit, and Tamil, apart from Sanskrit. These studies indicated that the ideas contained in normative Sanskrit texts were overall recognized as authoritative. They were also questioned and occasionally even rejected. So, as the texts were written in the normative Sanskrit text, and the ideas in the normative Sanskrit text looked authoritative. I mean, basically related to the authority, related to the kings. However, they were also questioned and occasionally even rejected. That is all about this part today. And you have all these assignment questions mentioned in the description as well. You can get the link from the description as well. Thank you and have a great day.